Okay, so I'm here with Kathy and Mitchell. They're the writers behind this brilliant unproduced script, The Living Soul. Congratulations. Welcome to Amsterdam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
No, you're more than welcome. So, looking at your profile, I think it was on Film Free, well, without, I can't remember. And it kind of, to me, played into, because they say write what you know, don't they, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it plays into this story, but rather than me put words into your mouth, perhaps you want to tell us the synopsis of this and give us an idea of where the whole idea came from. Because it's quite bizarre in terms of, it's a very, very unique story, but yeah, I'll let you carry on.
Well, the story began when I was in training as a medical doctor. In the States, you do an internship, you do a residency, and then you become what they call an attending doctor. Well, in the first couple of years of your training, you go through a lot of stress. You work 80 to 100-hour weeks. You don't get much sleep. And when you do get to rest, it's a luxury. So I started meditating to deal with the stress because about half of the doctors that go into training quit and they're cut out.
Is that right? Is that
That's
the attrition rate?
In the residency we were in, there were 5 of us that started, 2 finished.
So it's actually over half.
Yeah, it was much over half. One girl had a nervous breakdown. Another just quit because of the stress. And one got pregnant, but then she had trouble with her pregnancy and couldn't come back. And so it was just me and one other lady from India that finished.
And of course, they never tell you this when you go to medical school.
No, the psychiatry residency is the second most stressful residency after surgery. And I didn't know that.
No.
I didn't know that.
I mean, we do all the stats and facts and figures in the UK, and I don't think it's dissimilar.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very tough. Very expensive, of course. Very expensive, of course.
Very expensive.
Which is probably a debt you carry with you for a long, long time. I suspect. Well, no, they're deadly serious. You know, because I know what kind of figures are involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, you survived this.
I
if
survived
that's the right
it.
word.
I survived it because I started deep meditation.
Yeah.
Your blood pressure goes up. You see people die on a regular basis. People kill themselves and try to kill themselves in front of you, and you also have the stressful work of dealing with people who are mentally unstable at a very high level. And you do this when you're at a young age, you're in a lot of debt, and you're sleep deprived. And so I can understand why so many people don't make it. In the training, you have to learn how to deal with the stress, and that's where the meditation came in. Well, after a couple years of doing the work and the meditating, I began to go into very deep levels of consciousness. And in this consciousness, I started meeting other people in consciousness. And at first, I thought I was hallucinating. And I wasn't sure that I wasn't hallucinating. But I met a being from, as best I could tell, from another dimension of reality. And that's what the story is about, my interactions with that being.
So before we get on to that, because I'm now obviously intrigued by this, when you reach that level of deep consciousness, because it sounds to me as though, obviously I have no idea what you went through, but it sounds to me quite frightening in terms of...
Well, if you've ever been swimming or diving, you go to a certain point when you're diving where you know you're separated from the land. You know you're separated from, even if you're in a pool, you can't see the shore. And so it's a bit like trying to say hello to someone when you're 10 feet underwater.
Okay.
You know that you're cut off from that part of reality.
Okay. So I know this has now become the kernel of what will become the script.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you fit into
How
this?
do I fit in? That's a very good question. Actually, at the time that he was going through all of this, he hadn't met me yet. But
oh, so this is pre you.
It's actually pre me, but because we've had such a great influence on each other, he did not want to write the script without me in it, so he put me in there. But the experiences that are in the script, I went through as well. It's just not at that time period.
So do you have a medical background as well?
I do not have a medical background.
But even so, stress is stress and pain is pain. you know, I'm coming
No, I have
from.
a business background.
Right, okay. So you two came together, and at some point...
We actually met online.
Right, okay.
And she was working for a telephone company, and I was in my private practice. We met online and we started dating. We hit it off splendidly, immediately. But we found that we both had an interest in spirituality and meditation, and this is a very intellectual, brilliant woman, and we would talk for hours about many things. And so when I was writing the script, I incorporated my experience from my residency and training with our conversations, and it became a life. Even though it didn't happen temporally in that way, it was our life in writing.
Did you, and this spirituality and this deeper meaning and going on this journey, were you aware that you felt this way before you started meditation?
I started my spiritual journey very young.
Right.
Probably when I was 10, 12 years old. I grew up in a very, very bad neighborhood.
So you've really worked to get where you are.
Mm-hmm.
I saw my father shoot someone when I was 5. I saw my mother shoot someone when I was 5. Both people lived, but that was my neighborhood. People would break into the house, and my mom would go to the door and shoot her way past the people who were breaking in. That's the kind of stress I had to deal with.
I can't really
Yeah.
relate to that, if I'm honest.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you say you were spiritual and from an early age, are we talking about? I'm not hoping I'm not getting too personal, but obviously it lends to where we're going with this.
Of course.
Were you a Christian believer? Did you believe? Do you believe in God?
I grew up in the South in the States.
Right.
And I was a Sunday school teacher. And I was also what they call the Sunday school superintendent, which meant that at 12 years old, I was guiding the entire church in prayer and studying the Bible. So I was very spiritual and very religious at a very young age.
Okay. And with this, if we can just jump forward, so you've met online and you're now at some point together. How does this become the story that it becomes? Because I know from talking to lots and lots of people that write, this is not a 5-minute job.
No.
And I suspect this is I guess, I don't know, this is a late draft. I mean, I don't know how many drafts you have to say. I'm trying to understand how you became involved in this and how you helped him hone this, or together you honed this to be to make it what it is. Because, sorry, it's got to be an engaging story. It's got to be an interesting story. It's got to...
During my residency, about 3 years into it, I was in meditation, and I had learned to meditate while looking directly at the sun. And
is that possible? How's that possible?
I know. I met a man by the name of Gene Savoy, who was a spiritual teacher. He passed maybe 10 years ago or so. And he teaches a technique that allows you to take in sunlight without hurting your eyes.
But I mean, you immediately think of burnt retinas and...
You think of detached retinas, burning out your corneas, blindness, the whole 9 yards. But it doesn't happen when you use this ancient technique that a group called the Essenes used to use. The Essenes are the original people that Jesus studied with, and part of their work was using sunlight as part of their meditation. It's a brilliant process, it works, and it alters consciousness. So in this process, when you look at sunlight, you go lie down. To make a long story short, this being appeared to me. Being was about 10 feet tall, floating, and the being began to speak. Well, I was certain that I was sleeping, absolutely certain that I was making it all up. And then I looked down and realized that I was not sleeping, that I was wide awake, and the being was right there. And we had conversations. The being taught me how to come out of my body, astral projection, so to speak. And in that, I began to explore the neighborhood around me in a very different way. I began to explore the sky and the city in Philadelphia from a vantage point of a being flying above it. And in the conversations, I learned about a lot about reality, about the human soul, and about the nature of this being that had come to me from another dimension. And as I learned, this being had been watching me meditate and was waiting for an opportunity for me to reach a state where he could reach me, so to speak.
Can I ask, do you believe in multiverses?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yes. In quantum mechanics and physics, we're
talking about infinite multiverses.
Yes, they state that reality doesn't work unless there are multiple dimensions of reality to bring everything together.
So in quantum theory and relativity and all the high science and physics, I guess you're a great proponent of that kind of work? And
Yes.
does that fit? I'm not saying
Very-
neatly. That's the wrong way to. Does
very
that
much
fit
so.
into your beliefs?
Very much so. Very
Okay.
much so.
Okay, and so again, so where does how does this all
Okay, so-
sorry, yeah.
Okay,
So how
so
does this
how do-
lead into this? Yeah.
When we got together in our conversations, because he told me about this experience that he had when he was in his residency. And I said, well, this is a story that needs to be told so that people would know that there's more to reality than what we've been told to believe.
Yeah.
And I said, you need to tell the story. So I encouraged him to write the book, The Living Soul.
Yeah.
And that is where the script comes from.
Yeah, because I should have realised, pointed out the book came before the script.
That's
didn't
right.
It? Yeah.
The book came before the script. And so when he finished the book, he said that, I think that it would be, he wanted me to be in the book because I was such a big part of his life.
Yeah.
His life as a spiritual being. Most people, before he became spiritual and wouldn't go back to religion, they wanted to change him. They wanted him to stay religious. They didn't want him to branch out into spirituality. Myself, was a Christian for 40 years. My father was a Baptist minister, so I grew up very religious. But when I met him, things happened where I became more spiritual than religious.
Right.
My foundation was pretty much shaken, and I started to grow and evolve much further than I ever had when I was a Christian.
This is very interesting. So when you say you became more spiritual, I kind of think I understand, but can you explain? Because to a lot of people that may sound the same, but of course it isn't. But is it possible to elaborate what you mean by
I
that?
have a greater understanding of the universe, and that the Creator, which most people call God, the Creator has created other beings, other gods that I also believe in as well. So it's not just God, Jesus, and Holy Spirit is the Trinity.
The Trinity,
in
yeah,
religion.
Trinity, yeah.
I know that there's truth in all religions, and it's a matter of you being more open to the differences, where I don't close myself off thinking that this is just one belief. I think God is all things, and that we are children of that God. And so for my belief, it was important that I encourage him to continue on his spiritual journey and not fall back into what people thought he should be. And that was very important for him as a doctor, as a person, and as a person he has become.
So would you mind me asking, do you believe, when you think, I don't know how old our universe is, 13.5 billion years or whatever they think it is from the Big Bang, if you believe in the Big Bang, and expansion and wormholes and and all this other stuff, and right down to, like say, quantum mechanics and the tiniest particle, do you believe there is a creator of that? I mean, I've got no mind. I don't think about it one way or the other, but it'd just be interesting to,
I
whether
believe
you
that,
call him God.
I believe that our universe is a living being.
Right.
That the universe itself, that we are part, if you will, cells inside of the body of that being. That each of us have a consciousness that is connected through the consciousness of that being. The Kabbalists, Jewish Kabbalists, call that being Adam Kadmon. One being, one soul that we are a part of. We are living souls within a greater living soul.
So I assume you don't believe in death, or when what we call die is just another phase of our
Death
existence, I
is
suspect.
waking consciousness in another dimension.
Well, okay. This is fascinating stuff. I love this.
Yes. In one of the first times that I experienced consciousness in another dimension is that way was when I was growing up. My grandmother was my babysitter, and my grandmother, when she socialized, she went to funerals.
Okay.
My
Funeral crashers, not
She
wedding
was a
crashers.
funeral
right,
crasher. She went to 2 or 3 funerals every week, and my grandmother liked to sit right up front, right near the body, and it terrified me as a child. And I went home, and several times that I went home after the funeral, or sometimes during the funeral, I would see the person lying in the casket, standing in the corner, or standing over their casket, looking down at themselves. Now, I made the mistake of telling my pastor and my grandmother this, and I got spanked for telling them. They thought I was making it up, but I wasn't making it up. And so when I went home, the person would often follow me home because they knew that I could see them. And I realized that yes, that person was dead. That person was going to be buried, but something remained. Something after the death of the body remained in consciousness. And then I began seeing them in dreams. And I realized that death is not the last story in a person's life. There is something beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there must be something, because this, I mean, we're going to get, we're going to go, actually, we're going to probably go completely off piste here, so I'll probably step away with this, because otherwise we'll end up talking about it for hours. And now, the big challenge for someone that's written a book, as you now know, is a book and a script are radically different ways of writing, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Did you, and I don't know if this is your first book,
That was at the time my third book.
Okay, so you've got the writing experience. Did you have the experience of writing a script from a book? Was that this your first time?
This was our first script.
Okay.
The book followed me into residency. It followed me into taking care of severely mentally ill people who had spirits around them. The same way that I saw spirits after funerals, these spirits or people also follow people who are mentally ill. And they'll tell you that I see these things, I'm hearing things. And initially, I would just medicate them to try to make whatever it was go away. But
as a purely medical condition?
As a purely medical, you need a shot, you need a pill, you need to be restrained, I need to keep you safe from these things. And then I realized that they were having a type of consciousness experience that needed to be understood at a deeper level. In the story, there's a young woman who is very suicidal. She wants to kill herself, and she doesn't mind hurting other people to get her way. And in the story, this being helps me take care of her. I get her stabilized. We get her discharged from the hospital, but then she comes back into the hospital after having tried to kill herself for like the 5th time. But at the end of the story, we discovered that her soul had transferred itself into another person. This person was a pregnant lady, an Asian lady, who was in the throes of delivery. And in the delivery, this spirit came out of the lady who had now died, and she was trying to get into the body of the baby that was going to be delivered. And that's where the story kind of takes off.
But I guess I'd like to know how difficult it was transitioning the book into the script, because it's not, and as we said earlier, I was pretty certain this draft is not, because most of the time
no, we've rewritten it.
It's very
20 times.
Can you give us a flavour of, so you've got a lovely writing experience, you can write books, you're going to write a script, but all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe you went, well, hang on a minute, now I'm realising this is actually very, very different.
But the visual and the art of writing a script is very different than writing a book.
Yes.
With a book, you have a lot more license to describe and create, and that you can go more into the dialogue. With the script, you have a certain number of pages. You have to capture the reader's attention within the first 10 pages, or you don't have a reader.
Yeah. No one's going to be interested.
And it was also a task to incorporate my lovely wife into the writing. So I had to capture the reader's attention, make sure the dialogue was very tight and very readerly, so that it didn't go on and on like it did in the book. And you had to adopt a whole different style so that you could have the medium and the story in a form that I'd never used before.
And Kathy, had you, I was talking about Mitchell, but had you writing experience before this?
Not in that capacity.
Right.
I have written since then, but not in that capacity, not when we first started to do this.
So you're putting together this script. And it's always very interesting, because I speak to single script writers, I speak to dual script writers, often a husband and wife, actually, interestingly. And the question I sort of often posited is, how do you put this together? This is not necessarily a typical example, this is an example, so I'd like to know how you work. And one example that I remember is, I think this couple were Filipinos, I think they're Filipinos, and one said, the man said, I would write it, and then my wife would tear it to pieces. And I thought he was kind of joking, but he wasn't really. And I said,
right.
I told him when he said, no. What I mean is, I expected that, because I would give her the script, and then she would not completely, well, she might completely rewrite it. He said, but we found it's the only way we could work together. Now you may or may not work that, I don't know, but I guess I'm trying to find out how you did put it together.
Well, I had the idea, And then we do a lot of our talking and thinking while lying in bed. And so I would give her the idea, and she would come back with the kernel of what she would like to see in there. And then we would kind of digest the idea together. And then I would go upstairs and write. And I would bring back what I wrote, and she would look at it and say, this is good. But this is good, but. And that's the process.
Yeah. So do you think two heads are better than one?
Oh,
Yes.
definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I suppose one person would say, well, have you thought this? Oh, no, and, maybe we should do it this way.
We do our best thinking when we talk and think together. Something happens. There's an energy between us that is much better when we're together than if we're separate. His thinking separately and my thinking separately is different than when we think together.
Yeah.
When we think together, it's a much better project.
I think
much better product.
I mean, you come across as very, this isn't a criticism, this is a nice thing I'm saying, well I think it is, you come across as very laid back and very relaxed people. I mean, I don't know you personally. And that may be because of your background and perhaps you see things differently, maybe you were more, I don't know, you weren't that, I don't know you, but I suppose what I'm trying to get at is how, in the round, how difficult was this to put together, however many drafts you went through? Was there any time, I'm sure you never thought about giving up, but was there any times you thought, you know what, this is so much more difficult than I thought it would be?
Well, it was picked up, the script has been picked up by two different studios. One, Wonderland Production, one we worked with, and we worked with William Morris Agency in the United States.
They're the second one is very well known, of course.
Yes. And during the process of working with them, we had to do so many drafts. They would say, we like this, but we would like to do the cafe scene, and we'd like you to use this language, and imagine that you're in Paris. Okay, that was nice, we like that, but now let's do it. And that we went through that for 2 years.
Yeah, this is the danger, and again, I've come across this so many times, and I know virtually every script that I know about that's picked up, made into a film is not the script that went there.
Not at all.
It will
not at all.
I would say it'd be impossible for any script writer to do that. I've never come across so of course you've got to take that into account as well.
That's right.
In fact, the story let's assume it gets filmed. It may not even be the
Well, the story that our agent sold was very difficult than the ones that the studios have picked up, very difficult than the one that the festival picked up. And after a while, you learn that you have to be flexible in the telling of your story. You can't be married too much to your concept. Otherwise, you never get to communicate the story that will reach the public, because that's going to be a very different story.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the same in any far-flung sense of the word. What do you think?
I think that if you're not flexible, it will never be seen.
Correct. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, it will never be seen if you're not.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.